Imagine a single day of eating that could lower your risk of insulin resistance by 71%. Not a medication, not an injection, just breakfast, lunch, and dinner, eaten in a specific order with specific foods for one ordinary day. That number is real. It comes from an actual study, and I am not going to spend this video telling you it was made up. But here is the paradox I want you to sit with for a second. The exact meal plan I am about to show you, the one that produces that 71% number, will not give you anything close to that result if you copy it the way most people copy these videos. And that is not a contradiction. That is the entire story. I want to be completely honest about why this matters, because I have reviewed enough of these what I eat in a day videos to recognize the pattern instantly. Someone sees a viral clip, someone with a clean kitchen and a confident voice eating a bowl of something green with a number flashing on the screen. They copy the bowl. They skip everything else in that person's day. And 3 months later, their blood work looks exactly the same as it did before. Not because the original claim was a lie, but because they took people managing blood sugar and metabolic health every week. And one of the most common questions I get sent is some version of, I tried the diet from that video, why didn't it work for me? So here is what this video is actually going to do. First, I am going to show you the full day of eating that this 71% figure is based on, meal by meal, so you actually get what you came here for. Then I am going to show you exactly where that number gets misunderstood and why isolating one part of this day from the rest of it is the single most common mistake in nutrition content right now. And by the end, you will understand not just what to eat, but why it works, which is the only way this information actually sticks. Let's start with breakfast, because this is where most blood sugar problems either get solved or get made worse before 9 in the morning. The meal that anchors this entire day is built around 3 things working together: protein first, fiber close behind, and carbohydrates last, in that order, on the plate and in the order you actually eat them. A practical version looks like this: 2 eggs, a generous handful of spinach cooked into the eggs, half an avocado, and a serving of berries on the side, eaten after the eggs and avocado, not before. Now, number 1 and why this works. Eating protein and fat before carbohydrate changes how quickly glucose enters your bloodstream after the meal. There was a study published in Diabetes Care that measured this directly, comparing the same meal eaten in different orders, and the carbohydrate last group showed a meaningfully smaller blood sugar spike than the same food eaten in the reverse. Same calories, same ingredients, different sequence, different outcome. Here's the mechanism, because the why matters more than the what. Stomach, it digests fast and floods your bloodstream with glucose almost immediately. Protein and fat slow gastric emptying, which means that same carbohydrate eaten after them trickles in instead of flooding in. Your pancreas gets a gentle request for insulin instead of an urgent one. And that distinction matters because chronically urgent insulin requests, repeated meal after meal, year after year, are exactly what wears down insulin sensitivity over time. This is the kind of detail that never makes it into a 60-second clip. The clip shows you the eggs and the berries. It does not show you that the order you eat them in is doing real physiological work. Let me tell you about Robert. Robert is a composite of clinical patterns you see often, not one specific person, but his story is familiar to nearly anyone managing blood sugar after 50. Robert found a What I Eat in a day video almost identical to what I just described. He saw the 71% number. He saw the eggs, the avocado, the berries. So he started eating that exact breakfast every single morning. Nothing else changed. Same lunch as always, fast food a few times a week, same evening on the couch, same 4 or 5 hours of sleep most nights. 3 months later, Robert came in frustrated. His fasting glucose had barely moved. His hemoglobin A1C, the test that reflects average blood sugar over time, was essentially unchanged. And most people have no idea what to make of that because they did the thing they saw. They ate the breakfast. Why didn't the number move? Robert's mistake was not eating the wrong breakfast. His mistake was treating one meal as if it were the entire intervention, when the 71% figure was never described one meal in isolation. And that's not a minor distinction. That's the entire reason this video exists. So where does 71% actually come from? It comes from a real study, and I want to walk through exactly what that study did, because the methodology is the whole story here. Researchers followed a large group of adults over time, the kind of study we call an observational cohort. They did not hand anyone a fixed meal plan and tell them to follow it for a year. Instead, they tracked what people were already eating, using detailed food logs, and they monitored a marker of insulin resistance throughout the study period. What they found was that the people whose overall eating pattern most closely matched this protein-first, fiber-forward, low-refined carbohydrate structure had a 71% lower likelihood of developing significant insulin resistance. Eating the least like that. Nobody in that study was given a specific breakfast and told that breakfast alone would produce this result. The 71% describes an entire dietary pattern, sustained across an entire day, sustained across the length of the study. The clip you saw extracted one breakfast from that pattern and presented it as if the breakfast alone carried the full effect. So here's what makes this so important to understand correctly. The eggs and avocado breakfast was not the cause of that 71% number. It was a passenger riding inside a much larger pattern, not the driver of the result. Think about who actually eats breakfast that way, consistently, as part of daily life. People who eat protein first at breakfast are, almost by definition, the same people who are paying attention to what they eat at lunch and dinner too. They are more likely to be walking regularly. They are more likely to be sleeping enough. They are more likely to be managing stress in ways that don't involve a bag of chips at 10 at night. The breakfast is a marker of a health-conscious lifestyle, not a standalone fix for that lifestyle's absence. And researchers can actually test this distinction directly. When you statistically separate out the effect of overall diet quality, physical activity, and sleep from the breakfast pattern alone, and ask whether the breakfast structure by itself still predicts the outcome, the strength of that link drops sharply. The breakfast was riding alongside the real drivers. It was not driving the car. This is the part that most videos seem to skip over entirely, because it is much less exciting than a number on a screen. So what happens when researchers test this more rigorously, isolating the meal, structure itself from everything else in someone's life? This is where it gets genuinely interesting, and it's the part I most want you to remember. In randomized controlled trials, the gold standard for testing cause and effect, where one group follows a specific meal sequencing protocol, and a comparison group does not, with both groups otherwise living their normal lives, the measured effect on insulin resistance markers is real, but most trials in this space show a modest improvement. Meaningful, worth doing, but nowhere close to the headline number, because the headline number was never measuring the meal alone in the first place. This is not me telling you that meal sequencing doesn't matter. It does. The mechanism we discussed in Block 1 is real and supported by controlled evidence. What I am telling you is that the 71% figure was always describing an entire way of living, and a single isolated component of that pattern will give you a real, but modest piece of that benefit, not the whole thing. And this is not the first time this exact mistake has shown up in nutrition science. For years, observational data linked higher fiber intake to dramatically lower rates of colon cancer, and for a while, fiber supplements were marketed aggressively on the strength of that association. But when researchers ran controlled trials giving people concentrated fiber supplements in isolation, the protective effect against cancer largely disappeared. The fiber wasn't the whole story. People eating high-fiber diets were also eating more vegetables, less processed meat, and generally living differently across the board. Same pattern. Real number, real study, wrong conclusion when one piece gets extracted and sold as the whole mechanism. So if the breakfast alone isn't the driver, what actually moves the needle on insulin resistance? This is where I want to give you the rest of that day. It's because this is the part the viral clip leaves out entirely. Lunch in this pattern centers on a large plate of non-starchy vegetables, a palm-sized portion of protein such as chicken, fish, or legumes, and a small portion of whole grain or starchy vegetable, again eaten after the vegetables and protein. The mechanism is the same one from breakfast, fiber and protein slowing the glucose response from whatever carbohydrate follows. Dinner follows a similar structure, but with one addition that matters specifically for insulin sensitivity overnight: a short walk afterward. Even 10 to 15 minutes of walking after a meal measurably blunts the blood sugar rise that follows eating, because contracting muscle pulls glucose out of the bloodstream without needing as much insulin to do it. This single habit, walking after dinner, has more controlled evidence behind it for blood sugar control than almost any specific food choice you could make. And underneath all of it sits sleep. Even a few nights of inadequate sleep can temporarily worsen insulin sensitivity, which means the rest of this eating pattern is working against a headwind if sleep is consistently short. None of this costs money. None of it requires product. It requires consistency across an entire day, repeated across weeks, which is exactly why it is harder to put in a 60-second video than a single breakfast bowl. So here is the full day, start to finish, the way it is actually meant to work together. Breakfast: 2 eggs cooked with spinach, half an avocado, a small serving of berries eaten last. Mid-morning, if needed, A small handful of nuts or plain Greek yogurt, nothing with added sugar. Lunch. A large plate of non-starchy vegetables and a palm-sized portion of lean protein, with a small portion of whole grain or starchy vegetable eaten after the vegetables and protein, not before. Afternoon. A short walk if one wasn't already taken earlier in the day, even 5 to 10 minutes. Dinner. A similar structure to lunch. Vegetables and protein first, a modest portion of complex carbohydrate last, followed by a 15-minute walk afterward whenever possible. Evening. A consistent bedtime, aiming for 7 to 8 hours of sleep, because the meals above are working against you if sleep is consistently short. That is the day. Not a magic breakfast. A repeatable structure, built around a mechanism that holds up under controlled testing, sustained long enough for it to matter. Here's how I would actually approach this if I were starting today. I would not try to change every meal at once. I would pick one meal, most often breakfast, because it's the easiest to control, and practice the protein first, fiber forward, carbohydrate last sequence for 2 weeks before touching anything else. Once that feels automatic, I would apply the same sequence to lunch, then dinner, and only then add the after-dinner walk as a separate habit. Stacking one habit at a time is slower to start and far more likely to still be in place a year from now, which is the only time frame that actually changes a hemoglobin A1C result. Robert, by the way, eventually got there, not by finding a better breakfast, but by rebuilding his entire day the way we just walked through it, one piece at a time, over about 4 months. His fasting glucose came down, his energy in the afternoon stopped crashing. Nothing of his story involved a supplement or a single miracle food. This video is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Robert, a composite of clinical patterns and not a real individual. Please consult your physician before changing any dietary pattern, especially if you are currently taking medication for diabetes or blood pressure, since improved insulin sensitivity can sometimes require a medication adjustment with your doctor's guidance. If this helped you understand why the meal mattered less than the pattern, do me a favor and share it with someone who's been chasing the next viral breakfast, looking for a shortcut that was never really there. And if you want the next layer of this, the specific science of why walking after meals works better than almost any supplement on the market, I have a full video on that exact mechanism, and it's a natural next step from everything we just covered here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.